Elena sat by the small window of her grandmother's old house, watching the autumn leaves fall like tears from the bare trees. The newspaper lay open on the wooden table, its pages yellow from age and worry. Her stepfather Victor had circled one particular advertisement with his thick red pen, the same pen he used to mark his gambling debts. American rancher, seeks wife. Good home, honest work, fresh start in Montana. The words blurred as Elena's eyes filled with tears. At 22, she had never imagined her life would come to this. 2 years ago, when her mother was still alive, Elena had dreams of opening a small bakery in town. Her mother's bread was famous throughout their village, and Elena had learned every secret recipe. But those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now. The door creaked open, and Victor's heavy boots echoed across the floor. He smelled of cheap vodka and disappointment. His clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were red from another night of losing money he didn't have. "Have you thought about what I told you?" Victor's voice was rough like gravel on a dirt road. Elena didn't look up. She knew what he wanted to hear, but the words stuck in her throat like broken glass. Outside, she could see Mrs. Petrov hanging laundry on her line, her movements quick and efficient. Elena remembered when her own mother used to do the same thing, humming old folk songs as she worked. "Elena, I'm talking to you." Victor's voice grew louder, more demanding. "I heard you," Elena said quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of her mother's old shawl. Victor had given her 2 choices, both terrible. She could marry Boris Volkov, the wealthy merchant who owned 3 shops in town. Boris was 45 years old with hands like raw meat and a temper that scared even the strongest men. He had already buried 2 wives, both mysteriously young when they died. The other choice was the advertisement, becoming a mail-order bride to a stranger in a country she had never seen. "Boris came by yesterday," Victor said, pouring himself another drink from the bottle he kept hidden behind the flour jar. "He's offering good money for you. Enough to pay off my debts and fix the roof before winter." Elena's stomach twisted. She had seen how Boris looked at her when she walked past his shops. His eyes followed her like a hungry wolf watching a lamb. The women in town whispered stories about his previous wives, how they had bruises that never seemed to heal, how they became quiet and fearful before they died. "I won't marry Boris," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's face turned red, the same color as the ink on the newspaper. "You think you have a choice? Your mother left us with nothing but debts and broken dreams. This house is falling apart, the farm is worthless, and winter is coming fast." Elena closed her eyes and remembered her mother's last words. "Be strong, my little dove. Find your own happiness no matter how dark things become." Her mother had been sick for months, coughing up blood and growing thinner each day. But even on her deathbed, she had tried to protect Elena from Victor's plans. The house felt empty without her mother's laughter. Every corner held memories. The kitchen where they baked together, the garden where her mother taught her about herbs and healing, the small bedroom where her mother had brushed Elena's long brown hair every night before bed. "If you won't marry Boris, then you'll write to this American," Victor said, tapping the newspaper with his finger. "At least he'll pay for your travel. Once you're gone, you'll be his problem, not mine." Elena opened her eyes and looked at the advertisement again. The American rancher's name was Thomas Mitchell. He was a widower with a young daughter, looking for a wife to help run his ranch and care for his child. His letter, printed in the newspaper, seemed kind enough. He promised a warm home, honest work, and respectful treatment. But Elena had learned not to trust promises from men. Victor had promised her mother he would take care of Elena after the wedding. He had promised to be a good stepfather, to treat Elena like his own daughter. Instead, he had gambled away her mother's jewelry, sold their best furniture, and now wanted to sell Elena herself. That night, Elena lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind rattling the loose shutters. She could hear Victor snoring in the next room, probably dreaming about the money he would get from selling her. The house was cold. They couldn't afford enough wood to heat all the rooms. Elena pulled her mother's quilt closer around her shoulders and tried to imagine what America might be like. She had heard stories from other villagers. Some said it was a land of golden opportunities where even poor people could become rich. Others warned that it was full of dangers and wild animals, where women disappeared without a trace. The American rancher had sent a photograph with his letter to the newspaper. Thomas Mitchell looked to be in his 30s with kind eyes and a strong jaw. He was standing next to a little girl who must be his daughter. They both looked clean and well-fed, which was more than Elena could say for herself these days. But Elena knew that photographs could lie. Men could look gentle in pictures and be monsters in person. Her own stepfather had seemed charming when he was courting her mother. He had brought flowers and candy, spoken softly, and made promises about their future together. It wasn't until after the wedding that his true nature showed. Elena got up and walked to her mother's old trunk in the corner of the room. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were her mother's most precious possessions: a gold necklace that had belonged to Elena's grandmother, a silver bracelet with tiny bells, and a pair of pearl earrings that her mother had worn on her wedding day. These were Elena's only valuable possessions now. If she decided to go to America, she would have to sell them to pay for the journey. The thought of parting with her mother's jewelry made her heart ache. But what choice did she have? She held the necklace up to the moonlight streaming through her window. The gold caught the light and seemed to glow with warmth. Her mother had told her that this necklace was magical. It had brought good luck to every woman in their family who wore it. "Help me, Mama," Elena whispered to the darkness. "Show me what to do." As if in answer, a gentle breeze moved through the room even though the windows were closed. Elena felt a moment of peace, as if her mother's spirit was trying to comfort her. Tomorrow she would have to make a decision that would change her life forever. She could stay and marry the cruel Boris Volkov, accepting a life of fear and probably an early death. Or she could take the terrifying leap into the unknown, trusting her fate to a stranger in a distant land. Either choice felt like jumping off a cliff into darkness. But at least with the American rancher, there was a small chance of finding something better than the hell that awaited her with Boris. Elena carefully wrapped the jewelry back in its tissue paper and returned it to the trunk. She would need every bit of courage her mother had given her to survive what was coming next. Elena woke up to the sound of breaking glass. Victor's angry voice echoed through the thin walls, followed by more crashing sounds from the kitchen. She pulled her worn blanket over her head, but it couldn't block out the noise of another one of his drunken rages. It had been 3 days since Victor showed her the newspaper advertisement, and Elena still hadn't given him an answer. But last night everything changed. Boris Volkov had come to the house around dinner time, his fat fingers wrapped around a bottle of expensive wine. Elena had hidden in her room, but she could hear every word through the paper-thin walls. Boris had laughed too loudly at Victor's jokes and spoken about Elena like she was a piece of livestock he was planning to buy. "She's young and strong," Victor had said. "Good for bearing children and keeping house. Her mother taught her to cook and sew. I want to see her before I make my final offer," Boris had replied, his voice oily and smooth. "Bring her out here." Elena's hands had shaken as she heard Victor's footsteps approaching her door. When he knocked, she pretended to be asleep. After a few minutes, he had returned to Boris with excuses about Elena feeling unwell. But Boris wasn't easily discouraged. "Next week, then. I'll come back next week, and she'd better be ready to meet me properly." The threat in his voice made Elena's blood run cold. She had heard that tone before, from men who were used to getting what they wanted through fear and violence. Now, as Victor stumbled around the kitchen, probably looking for more vodka, Elena made her decision. She couldn't wait any longer. Boris would be back in a few days, and if she wasn't gone by then, her fate would be sealed. Elena quietly got dressed in her best dress, a blue cotton one that her mother had sewn for her 18th birthday. It was faded now and had been mended several times, but it was still respectable. She braided her long hair carefully and pinned it up the way her mother had taught her. From under her bed, she pulled out a small wooden box where she had been hiding the money she made from selling eggs at the market. It wasn't much, barely enough for food for a week, but it was all she had. She added her mother's jewelry, wrapped carefully in an old handkerchief. Elena sat at the small desk by her window and pulled out a piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she began to write her letter to Thomas Mitchell. She had practiced the words in her head dozens of times, but putting them on paper felt like signing her life away. "Dear Mr. Mitchell," she began, trying to keep her handwriting neat despite her shaking fingers. "I am writing in response to your advertisement in the newspaper. My name is Elena Kozlov, and I am 22 years old. I am healthy, hardworking, and willing to travel to America to become your wife." She paused, staring at the words. They seemed so formal, so cold. How could she explain her real situation without sounding desperate? How could she tell this stranger that she was running for her life? "I can cook, clean, and take care of children," she continued. I have been managing a household since my mother passed away 2 years ago. I am looking for a fresh start in a new country, where I can build a good life with a kind and honest man. Elena bit her lip, wondering if she should mention her stepfather's gambling debts or Boris's threats. But she decided against it. Men didn't want damaged goods, and if Thomas Mitchell knew how desperate she truly was, he might change his mind about helping her. I have enclosed a photograph of myself, she wrote. Though she hadn't, she would have to go to town later that day to have one taken at the photographer's shop. If you are still interested in corresponding with me, please write back as soon as possible. I am eager to begin this new chapter of my life. She signed her name with a flourish, trying to make it look confident even though her heart was pounding like a drum. The sound of Victor's footsteps in the hallway made Elena quickly hide the letter under her pillow. She pretended to be brushing her hair when he knocked on her door. Elena, get out here. We need to talk. She opened the door to find Victor looking worse than usual. His shirt was stained with wine and his eyes were bloodshot. The kitchen behind him was a disaster. Broken plates scattered across the floor, overturned chairs, and what looked like the remains of last night's dinner splattered across the walls. Look what you made me do, Victor said, gesturing at the mess. All this worry about your stubbornness is driving me to drink. Elena wanted to point out that he had been drinking heavily long before she came into the picture, but she kept her mouth shut. No point in making him angrier than he already was. I've made my decision, Elena said quietly. Victor's eyes lit up with hope. Good, Boris will be pleased. We can have the wedding next month before the weather gets too cold. No, Elena said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm not marrying Boris, I'm going to America. Victor's face went through several expressions, confusion, anger, and then something that looked almost like panic. America? That's insane, Elena. You don't know anything about this man. He could be a criminal or worse. He could be, Elena agreed. But at least I'll have a chance with him. With Boris, I know exactly what will happen to me. Victor grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. You're being foolish. Boris is offering real money right now. This American could disappear tomorrow, and then where would you be? Elena pulled her arm free, surprised by her own strength. I'll be free, Victor. That's where I'll be. That afternoon, Elena walked to town with her mother's jewelry hidden in her coat pocket. The autumn air was crisp and clean, and she tried to enjoy what might be her last walk through the village where she had grown up. At the pawn shop, old Mr. Grigorovich examined her mother's necklace with a jeweler's loupe. Elena's heart ached as she watched him turn the precious gold over in his gnarled hands. It's good quality, he admitted. I can give you enough for passage to America, with a little left over. Elena closed her eyes and thought of her mother. I'm sorry, Mama, she whispered. But I think this is what you would want me to do. The transaction was quick and businesslike. Mr. Grigorovich counted out the money in American dollars, explaining that she would need them for her journey. Elena tucked the bills inside her coat, feeling like she was carrying her entire future in that small bundle of paper. At the photographer's shop, Elena posed for her picture, trying to look confident and respectable. The photographer, a kind woman named Mrs. Ivanova, noticed Elena's nervousness. Going somewhere special, dear? She asked as she adjusted the lighting. America, Elena said simply. Mrs. Ivanova nodded knowingly. My own daughter went to America 5 years ago. Married a good man in Chicago. She writes that it's a land of opportunities for those brave enough to take them. Elena smiled, the first real smile she had felt in weeks. Maybe she wasn't completely crazy after all. That evening, Elena mailed her letter to Thomas Mitchell along with her photograph. As she dropped the envelope into the mailbox, she felt like she was releasing a bird into the sky. Once it was gone, there was no calling it back. Walking home, Elena made a mental list of everything she would need to do before leaving. She would have to pack light, just one small bag with her most essential belongings. She would need to buy her train ticket to the port city, and then book passage on a ship to America. Most importantly, she would have to leave without Victor knowing. If he discovered her plans before she could escape, he would lock her in her room until Boris came to collect her. As she approached the house, Elena saw a light burning in the kitchen window. Victor was probably drinking again, drowning his sorrows and plotting ways to make Elena change her mind. But for the first time in months, Elena didn't feel afraid of him. She was still terrified of the unknown future that awaited her in America. But it was a different kind of fear now. The fear of someone about to jump off a high cliff into deep water, not knowing if they could swim, but knowing they had to try. Elena touched the spot over her heart where her mother's necklace used to rest. Even though the jewelry was gone, she could still feel its warmth like a blessing from beyond the grave. Elena's hands trembled as she held Thomas Mitchell's response letter. It had arrived just 5 days after she sent hers, faster than she had dared hope. His handwriting was neat and careful, the words of a man who took time to think before he spoke. Dear Miss Kozlov, the letter began. Thank you for your response to my advertisement. I was pleased to receive your photograph and letter. You seem like a respectable young woman, and I believe we might make a good partnership. I have enclosed money for your travel expenses and a train schedule. If you are still willing, please arrive in Billings, Montana by the first week of November. I will be waiting for you at the station. With respect, Thomas Mitchell. Inside the envelope was more money than Elena had ever seen at one time. Thomas had been generous, giving her enough not just for the journey, but for meals and a decent place to stay along the way. This small act of kindness gave her the first glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was making the right choice. But there was no time to hesitate. Victor had been asking questions about her trips to town, and yesterday she had seen Boris talking to him outside the village tavern. She needed to leave immediately. Elena packed her few belongings in her mother's old carpet bag. She took only the essentials: 2 dresses, some undergarments, her mother's recipe book, and a small wooden cross that had belonged to her grandmother. Everything else would have to stay behind. She left before dawn, while Victor was still sleeping off another night of drinking. Her note was brief. I have gone to America to marry the rancher. Do not try to find me. Elena. The walk to the train station took 2 hours through the morning mist. Elena's heart pounded with every step, expecting to hear Victor's voice calling her back or Boris's heavy footsteps behind her. But the road remained empty except for a few farmers heading to their fields. At the station, Elena bought her ticket with shaking hands. The clerk, a thin man with kind eyes, noticed her nervousness. First time traveling alone, miss? He asked gently. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. You'll be fine, he said, stamping her ticket. The journey to the port will take most of the day, but it's a comfortable train. There are other young ladies traveling too. You won't be alone. Elena found her seat in a car reserved for women traveling without male companions. Across the aisle sat 2 other young women about her age, both clutching similar carpet bags and wearing expressions of nervous excitement. The woman nearest to her had auburn hair and green eyes that looked like they had seen too much sadness for someone so young. She introduced herself as Anna Kowalski from Poland. I'm going to marry a farmer in Nebraska, Anna said, but her voice held no joy. My husband died in a mining accident last year. I have no family left, and winter is coming. This was my only choice. The other woman was younger, maybe 19, with bright blonde hair and blue eyes that sparkled with excitement. Her name was Sophia Peterson from Denmark. I'm going to marry a shopkeeper in California, Sophia said with a dreamy smile. He says he has a big house with a garden full of flowers. We've been writing letters for 6 months, and I think I'm already in love with him. Anna rolled her eyes. Don't be so foolish, child. These men aren't looking for love. They're looking for servants they don't have to pay wages to. Sophia's smile faltered. That's not true. My Heinrich writes beautiful letters. He says he's been lonely since his first wife died, and he promises to treat me like a queen. They all make promises, Anna said bitterly. Wait until you get there and see what their promises are really worth. Elena listened to their conversation with growing unease. She had tried to stay optimistic about Thomas Mitchell, but Anna's cynical words echoed her own deepest fears. What if she was just trading one form of slavery for another? The train journey to the port city took 12 hours, with stops in several towns along the way. At each station, Elena watched through the window as people got on and off, families saying goodbye, businessmen reading newspapers, children running alongside the train as it pulled away. She wondered if she would ever see her homeland again. The rolling hills and familiar farmhouses were disappearing behind her, replaced by landscapes she had never seen before. Every mile took her further from everything she had ever known. During the journey, Elena learned more about her traveling companions. Anna had been married to a coal miner who died when a tunnel collapsed. She had no children and no way to support herself. Her dead husband's family had turned her out of their house, claiming she brought bad luck. "At least in America I'll have a roof over my head," Anna said. "Even if my new husband is cruel, at least I won't starve in the street." Sophia's story was different. She came from a large family, 7 children with parents who could barely feed them all. When the shopkeeper's advertisement appeared in their local newspaper, Sophia's parents saw it as a blessing. "They're sad to see me go," Sophia explained. "But they know this is my chance for a better life. Heinrich says California has sunshine all year round and orange trees that grow right in your backyard." Elena shared her own story reluctantly. She didn't mention Boris's threats or Victor's violence, just saying that she was looking for a fresh start after her mother's death. But Anna seemed to read between the lines. "Running away from something, are you?" Anna asked quietly when Sophia dozed off against the window. Elena nodded, unable to lie to someone who clearly understood desperate circumstances. "Good," Anna said. "That means you're not completely naive. The naive ones get hurt the worst." At the port city, the 3 women stayed in a boarding house for women travelers. The room was small but clean, with 3 narrow beds and a window overlooking the harbor. Elena lay awake most of the night, listening to the sound of ship horns and waves against the dock. The next morning, they boarded the steamship that would take them across the ocean to America. The ship was larger than Elena had imagined, but it still felt small when she thought about the vast ocean they would have to cross. Their accommodations were in steerage, the cheapest passage available. The area below deck was crowded and stuffy, filled with families and individuals all seeking new lives in America. Elena, Anna, and Sophia managed to claim 3 bunks near each other. The first few days at sea were difficult. The ship rocked constantly, making many passengers seasick. Elena spent most of her time on deck when the weather allowed, breathing fresh air and watching the endless stretch of water in every direction. She met other passengers during these deck walks. A family from Ireland whose potato crops had failed, a young man from Germany who dreamed of becoming a cowboy, an elderly woman from Italy who was going to live with her son in New York. Everyone had a story, a reason for leaving everything behind to start over in an unknown land. Elena began to realize that she wasn't alone in her fear and hope. The ship was full of people taking the same terrifying leap of faith. On the 5th day, a storm hit. The ship pitched and rolled violently, and passengers were ordered to stay below deck. Elena huddled in her bunk, listening to the wind howl and the waves crash against the hull. Sophia was crying, convinced they were all going to drown. Even Anna, usually so tough and cynical, looked frightened. "What if we don't make it?" Sophia whispered. "What if this is all for nothing?" Elena surprised herself by reaching out to comfort the younger woman. "We'll make it," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We've come too far to give up now." The storm passed and the ship continued its journey across the Atlantic. Elena spent the remaining days thinking about what awaited her in Montana. She tried to imagine Thomas Mitchell's ranch, his young daughter, the wide-open spaces she had heard about in American stories. Sometimes she felt excited about the possibilities. Other times, usually late at night when doubt crept in, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But there was no turning back now. The ship was carrying her toward her destiny, whatever that might be. When land was finally spotted on the horizon, all the passengers crowded onto the deck to get their first glimpse of America. Elena stared at the distant coastline, her heart pounding with anticipation and terror. Sophia grabbed her hand. "We made it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Anna stood beside them, her expression unreadable. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. "The real journey starts now." The train whistle echoed across the Montana plains as Elena pressed her face to the window, watching the endless grasslands roll by. After 3 weeks of traveling, first by ship across the Atlantic, then by train through New York, Chicago, and countless smaller towns, she was finally approaching her destination. Her hands were damp with sweat despite the cool October air. In just a few hours, she would meet Thomas Mitchell face to face. All her hopes and fears had led to this moment. Elena had said goodbye to Anna and Sophia in Chicago. Anna was continuing to Nebraska, her face grim with resignation. Sophia was heading to California, still chattering excitedly about her Heinrich and his house full of flowers. Elena wondered if she would ever see either of them again, these women who had shared her journey into the unknown. Billings, Montana. Next stop, Billings, the conductor called out. Elena's stomach lurched. She checked her reflection in the small mirror from her bag, trying to smooth her hair and straighten her best dress. She looked tired and travel-worn, not like the fresh-faced girl in the photograph she had sent to Thomas. The train began to slow, and Elena gathered her few belongings. Through the window, she could see a small wooden station building surrounded by wide streets and simple buildings. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks capped with early snow. As the train came to a complete stop, Elena took a deep breath and stepped onto the platform. The air smelled different here, cleaner somehow with hints of sage and pine. The sky seemed bigger than any sky she had ever seen, stretching endlessly in all directions. Several people waited on the platform. A businessman checking his pocket watch, a woman in a fancy hat greeting an elderly man, and standing slightly apart from the others, a tall man in work clothes holding a sign with her name written on it. Thomas Mitchell was exactly as tall as he had appeared in his photograph, but somehow more solid in person. His brown hair was slightly mussed from the wind, and his face was weathered by sun and outdoor work. But his eyes were kind, just as she had hoped, and when he saw her approaching, his expression was gentle rather than demanding. "Miss Elena Kozlov?" he asked, removing his hat politely. "Yes," Elena managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas smiled, and Elena noticed that it reached his eyes. "Welcome to Montana. I'm Thomas Mitchell. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." Elena found her voice. "It was long, but not too bad. Thank you for meeting me. Of course. Here, let me take your bag." Thomas reached for her carpet bag, his movements careful and respectful. Elena noticed that his hands were clean despite being calloused from work, and he didn't try to touch her beyond taking her luggage. "This is a beautiful place," Elena said, looking around at the wide streets and distant mountains. "It grows on you," Thomas replied with a slight smile. "Very different from where you come from, I imagine." As they walked toward a wagon parked near the station, Elena studied Thomas from the corner of her eye. He moved with quiet confidence, nodding to people they passed who clearly knew and respected him. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, and his boots were sturdy rather than fancy. "I should tell you," Thomas said as he helped her into the wagon. "My daughter Lucy is very nervous about meeting you. She's been asking questions for days about whether you'll like her, whether you'll try to replace her mother." Elena's heart went out to the unknown little girl. "How old is Lucy?" 8. "She's been the lady of the house since my wife Rebecca passed 3 years ago. She's protective of her mother's memory." Elena nodded, understanding more than Thomas might realize. "That's natural. Losing a mother is very hard." Thomas gave her a searching look. "Yes, it is. I hope you'll be patient with her." The ride to Thomas's ranch took about 30 minutes through rolling grassland dotted with cattle. Elena had never seen so much open space or such big sky. It was both beautiful and slightly overwhelming after growing up in a small village surrounded by familiar hills and forests. "How much land do you have?" Elena asked. "About 500 acres. Not huge by some standards, but enough to run a decent herd of cattle and grow feed for the winter. The house isn't fancy, but it's solid and warm." As they crested a small hill, Elena saw the ranch spread out below them. The house was larger than she had expected. 2 stories with a wide front porch and smoke rising from the chimney. There were several outbuildings, a barn, a chicken coop, and what looked like a bunkhouse for hired hands. "It's wonderful," Elena said, and meant it. The place looked well cared for and prosperous, but not ostentatious. Thomas seemed pleased by her reaction. "Rebecca and I built it together, added rooms as we could afford them. There's even a proper bathroom upstairs. We had indoor plumbing installed 2 years ago." As the wagon approached the house, Elena saw a small figure watching from behind a curtain in one of the upstairs windows. When the child realized Elena had spotted her, she quickly disappeared. Thomas noticed too. "That would be Lucy. She's been watching for us since breakfast." Thomas helped Elena down from the wagon and led her up the front steps. The porch was decorated with pots of late-blooming flowers, and Elena could see that someone, probably Lucy, had swept it clean that morning. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a girl with Thomas's brown hair and serious gray eyes. She was wearing a blue dress that had been carefully pressed, and her hair was braided with ribbons. "Lucy, come meet Miss Elena," Thomas said gently. Lucy stepped forward reluctantly, her small hands clasped in front of her. "Hello," she said politely, but Elena could see the wariness in her eyes. "Hello, Lucy," Elena said, crouching down to the girl's eye level. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your father told me you've been taking very good care of him." Lucy nodded seriously. "Someone has to. Papa isn't very good at cooking and he forgets to mend his clothes." Elena smiled. "Well, maybe I can help with those things, but you'll have to teach me. I'm sure you know much more about taking care of this house than I do." For the first time, Lucy's expression softened slightly. "Really? Really? I've never lived on a ranch before. I'll need to learn everything." Thomas watched this exchange with obvious relief. "Why don't we go inside?" "I'm sure Miss Elena would like to see her room and get settled." The inside of the house was clean and comfortable, with simple but well-made furniture. Elena could see a woman's touch in the details: embroidered curtains, carefully arranged books, a quilt draped over the sofa. But there was also a sense of things being maintained rather than lovingly cared for, as if the house was still mourning its mistress. This was Rebecca's favorite room, Thomas said, noticing Elena's gaze lingering on a framed photograph of a pretty woman with kind eyes. She liked to sit by the window in the evenings and work on her sewing. Elena studied the photograph. Rebecca Mitchell had been beautiful in a quiet way, with gentle features and a serene expression. No wonder Lucy was protective of her memory. "She looks like she was a wonderful person," Elena said sincerely. Thomas's expression grew soft. "She was. Lucy has her mother's generous heart." Thomas showed Elena to her room on the second floor. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with a bed, a dresser, a small desk by the window, and a rocking chair in the corner. "This room has the best view of the mountains," Thomas explained. "Rebecca used to say the sunrise here was worth getting up early for." Elena walked to the window and looked out at the vast landscape. The mountains in the distance were touched with gold from the setting sun, and the grasslands seemed to stretch forever. "It's beautiful," she said. I can see why she loved it. Thomas lingered in the doorway as if he wanted to say something more but wasn't sure how. Finally he spoke. "Elena, I want you to know that I don't expect— that is, we can take time to get to know each other properly. There's no pressure to rush into anything." Elena felt a wave of relief. She had been dreading this conversation, wondering what Thomas's expectations might be. "Thank you. I appreciate your understanding." That evening at dinner, Elena got her first real sense of what life at the ranch would be like. The meal was simple: beef stew, fresh bread, and canned peaches, but hearty and well-prepared. Lucy had obviously been in charge of the cooking, and while she was competent for an 8-year-old, Elena could see ways to help. "This stew is delicious," Elena told Lucy. "Did you learn to cook from your mother?" Lucy nodded proudly. "Mama taught me lots of things before she got sick. She said a woman needs to know how to take care of her family." She was right. My mother taught me to cook, too. "Maybe we could cook together sometime. I could show you some recipes from my country." Lucy's eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of food do they eat where you come from?" Elena spent the rest of dinner telling Lucy and Thomas about Ukrainian cuisine, describing the bread her mother used to make and the soups that were perfect for cold winter days. Lucy asked dozens of questions, her initial shyness gradually melting away. After dinner, Thomas excused himself to check on the animals, leaving Elena and Lucy to clean up the kitchen together. As they washed dishes, Lucy chattered about life on the ranch, the horses she was learning to ride, the baby calves that had been born in the spring, her correspondence lessons with the teacher in town. "Papa says you're going to marry him," Lucy said suddenly, her voice becoming quiet again. Elena's first week at the Mitchell Ranch passed like a careful dance. She moved through the house quietly, observing everything, learning the rhythms of this new life while staying alert for any signs that Thomas might not be the kind man he appeared to be. Each morning she woke before dawn to help with breakfast. Lucy had been doing the cooking alone for months, and while the 8-year-old was remarkably capable, Elena could see she was tired of carrying such responsibility. "Let me help with the eggs," Elena offered on her third morning, watching Lucy struggle to flip them without breaking the yolks. Lucy hesitated, clearly torn between accepting help and maintaining her role as the woman of the house. Mama always said the eggs were the hardest part. She was right. Even grown women have trouble with eggs sometimes, Elena said gently. Maybe you could teach me how your papa likes his coffee instead. This compromise seemed to work. Lucy showed Elena the exact amount of coffee grounds Thomas preferred, and how he liked his cup warmed first with hot water. Meanwhile, Elena took over the more challenging cooking tasks, letting Lucy handle the things she could manage easily. Thomas noticed the change immediately. "These are the best eggs I've had in months," he said that morning, giving Elena a grateful smile. But Elena also noticed other things. Thomas was unfailingly polite to her, always saying please and thank you, never raising his voice or making demands. But she had lived with violent men before, and she knew they could hide their true nature for weeks or even months before showing their real faces. So Elena watched and waited, testing small boundaries to see how Thomas would react. When she rearranged the kitchen to make cooking more efficient, Thomas simply said, "That's a good idea." Rebecca always said the pots were too far from the stove. When Elena suggested they plant a vegetable garden in the spring, Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "I never had much luck with gardens, but Rebecca loved them. Would you like to use her old seed catalogs to plan what to plant?" When Elena asked if she could write a letter to Sophia, the young woman she had met on the ship, Thomas immediately offered to ride into town to post it for her. He never asked what she was writing about or tried to read over her shoulder. But the real test came at the end of Elena's first week. Thomas had hired a man named Jake Collins to help with the fall roundup, gathering and counting the cattle before winter. Jake was about 30 years old with greasy hair and clothes that smelled like he hadn't washed them in weeks. From the moment he arrived, Elena felt uncomfortable around him. Jake had a way of looking at Elena that made her skin crawl. When Thomas wasn't around, Jake would make comments about how lucky Thomas was to have such a pretty little wife, and how Elena must be grateful to have found such a good situation. Elena tried to avoid Jake as much as possible, but on Saturday evening, she was alone in the kitchen preparing dinner when Jake came inside looking for Thomas. "Boss ain't here," Jake said, letting his eyes roam over Elena's body in a way that made her feel dirty. "Went to check on the cattle in the north pasture." "I'll tell him you were looking for him," Elena said firmly, not looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. Instead of leaving, Jake moved closer. "You know, Elena, you seem like a smart woman. I bet you understand how things work out here." Elena's hand tightened on the knife handle. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean, Thomas is a good man, but he's not the only man around. A woman in your situation might want to keep her options open, if you know what I mean." Elena finally looked up, meeting Jake's eyes directly. "I know exactly what you mean, and I'm not interested." Jake's expression darkened. "That's not very friendly of you. Maybe you need to learn some manners." He reached out as if to touch Elena's face, but she stepped back quickly, raising the knife between them. "Don't touch me," Elena said, her voice deadly quiet. Jake laughed, but there was something ugly in the sound. "What are you going to do, little girl, cut me?" "If I have to." Elena had learned to defend herself during her years with Victor. She knew how to hold a knife so it looked serious, and she knew how to make her voice sound like she meant what she said. Jake seemed to realize that Elena wasn't bluffing. He took a step back, but his expression remained threatening. "Thomas won't always be around to protect you," he said. "You might want to think about that." Just then, the front door opened and Thomas walked in, stomping his boots on the doormat. He took one look at the scene in the kitchen, Elena holding the knife, Jake standing too close to her with an angry expression, and his whole demeanor changed. Elena had never seen Thomas angry before. His face went hard, and when he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "Jake, get away from her now." Jake tried to play innocent. "We were just talking, boss. No harm in that." "Get your things and get off my property," Thomas said, his voice getting quieter rather than louder. "Right now." "Now hold on, Thomas. You can't fire me over a little misunderstanding." Thomas stepped closer to Jake, and Elena could see the muscles in his jaw working. "There's no misunderstanding. I saw exactly what was happening here. You have 10 minutes to pack your gear and leave my ranch. If I ever see you near my family again, we're going to have a serious problem." Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Thomas's expression convinced him not to. He left the kitchen muttering under his breath about ungrateful women and bosses who didn't know a good worker when they saw one. Thomas waited until Jake was gone, then turned to Elena. "Are you all right?" Did he hurt you? Elena set down the knife with shaking hands. I'm fine. He didn't touch me. What did he say to you? Elena hesitated. She didn't want to repeat Jake's crude suggestions, especially not in front of Lucy, who was now standing in the doorway looking confused and frightened. He was inappropriate, Elena said carefully. I made it clear I wasn't interested in his attention. Thomas nodded grimly. I'm sorry. I should have seen what kind of man he was before I hired him. It won't happen again. From the kitchen window, they watched Jake load his belongings into his wagon and drive away. Elena noticed that Thomas stayed close to the window until Jake was completely out of sight. Papa, why did Jake have to leave? Lucy asked. Thomas knelt down to his daughter's level. Because he wasn't treating Elena with respect, and that's not allowed in our house. A man should always be respectful to ladies, especially in their own home. Lucy nodded seriously. Mama used to say that too. That evening, after Lucy went to bed, Thomas and Elena sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. Elena wrapped her mother's old shawl around her shoulders against the cool October air. I want you to know, Thomas said quietly, that you don't have to worry about men like Jake here. This is your home now and you should feel safe in it. Elena studied Thomas's profile in the fading light. His jaw was still set with anger over the afternoon's incident, and she could tell he was genuinely upset that she had been made uncomfortable. Thank you for sending him away, Elena said. Not all men would have done that. Thomas turned to look at her, his expression serious. Any man worth calling himself a man would protect the women in his household. That's not something special. That's just basic decency. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she allowed herself to believe that Thomas might truly be different from the men she had known before. In my village, Elena said carefully, women were often expected to handle such situations themselves. Men would say it was the woman's fault for encouraging unwanted attention. Thomas's expression grew grim. That's wrong. A woman shouldn't have to defend herself from men who can't behave properly. That's a man's job, to make sure the women in his care are protected and respected. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Elena found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't been able to since her mother's death. Thomas, she said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you choose to marry a stranger instead of finding someone here in Montana? Surely there are local women who would be interested in marrying you. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. There are a few unmarried women in town, but I suppose I wanted a fresh start. Someone who didn't know Rebecca, who wouldn't be constantly comparing herself to her or trying to fill her exact place. Does that make sense? Elena nodded. It made perfect sense. She understood the burden of trying to live up to someone else's memory. Also, Thomas continued, I figured a woman who was brave enough to travel across the ocean to marry a stranger probably had the kind of strength and determination that would be good for ranch life. I was right about that. Elena felt a warm glow at the compliment. I hope so. I'm still learning. You're doing fine, Thomas assured her. Lucy already adores you, and that's the most important thing to me. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Lucy appeared in the doorway in her nightgown. Papa, I can't sleep. Can Elena tell me a story from her country? Thomas looked at Elena questioningly. Would you mind? Elena smiled. I'd be happy to. They all went inside, and Elena tucked Lucy into bed before settling into the rocking chair beside her. She told Lucy an old Ukrainian folktale about a brave princess who outsmarted a wicked sorcerer, and by the time she finished, Lucy was fast asleep. November in Montana brought the first real snow, and with it, a blizzard that would change everything for Elena and the Mitchell family. She had been at the ranch for 3 weeks, and the careful politeness between her and Thomas was beginning to soften into something warmer. Elena woke on that Tuesday morning to an eerily quiet world. Looking out her bedroom window, she could see nothing but swirling white snow driven by howling wind. The storm had started sometime during the night and showed no signs of stopping. Downstairs, Thomas was already up, feeding wood into the kitchen stove and checking the windows. His expression was serious as he listened to the wind rattling the house. How bad is it? Elena asked, pulling her robe tighter around herself. Bad enough. This is what we call a blue norther. Came in fast and brought a lot of snow with it. We're going to be stuck inside for a few days at least. Lucy appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes. Papa, why is it so loud outside? Thomas scooped his daughter up in his arms. Just a big storm, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about. We have plenty of food and firewood and the house is strong. But Elena could see the concern in his eyes. Being trapped together for days would test the careful boundaries they had all been maintaining. By afternoon, the wind was so fierce that it shook the entire house. Snow piled against the windows, and Thomas had to keep checking to make sure the doors weren't blocked. Elena helped him move extra firewood into the kitchen and fill every available container with water from the well, just in case. What about the animals? Elena asked, watching Thomas prepare for another trip to the barn. They'll be fine. The barn is solid and they have plenty of hay and water, but I need to check on them every few hours. Thomas bundled up in his heavy coat and hat. I might be gone for a while. Sometimes it's hard to find your way back to the house in weather like this. Elena felt a stab of worry. Is it dangerous? It can be. Men have gotten lost walking from their barn to their house in storms like this, but I know this place like the back of my hand. Thomas tied a rope around his waist and secured the other end to the porch railing. Elena watched from the window as he disappeared into the white curtain of snow, following the rope like a lifeline. While Thomas was outside, Elena kept Lucy busy with indoor activities. They played card games, worked on Lucy's correspondence lessons, and Elena taught her some simple Ukrainian phrases. But both of them kept glancing toward the window, waiting for Thomas to return. When he finally came back an hour later, stamping snow off his boots and shaking ice from his mustache, Elena felt a relief that surprised her with its intensity. Everything all right? She asked, helping him out of his frozen coat. Animals are fine, warm and dry. Thomas's lips were blue with cold and his hands shook as Elena handed him a cup of hot coffee. But this storm isn't letting up anytime soon. We might be here for 3 or 4 days. That evening they gathered in the sitting room around the fireplace. Thomas had brought down extra blankets and pillows, turning the room into a cozy refuge from the storm outside. Elena worked on mending one of Lucy's dresses while Thomas repaired a broken harness and Lucy played with her wooden dolls. Elena, Lucy said suddenly, looking up from her dolls, were you scared when you came to America all by yourself? Elena considered the question carefully. Yes, I was very scared. I didn't know what would happen to me or whether I was making the right choice. What made you brave enough to do it anyway? Elena glanced at Thomas, who was listening quietly. Sometimes when you're scared of one thing, you find the courage to face something else that might be better even if you don't know for sure. Thomas looked up from his work. That takes real courage, choosing the unknown over something you know is bad. My mother always told me that brave people aren't people who aren't scared, Elena continued. Brave people are people who do what they need to do even when they are scared. Lucy nodded seriously. Mama used to say that too. She said she was scared when I was born, but she was brave because she wanted to take good care of me. That night the wind grew even stronger, and Elena lay in her bed listening to the house creak and groan around her. She must have finally fallen asleep because she woke to the sound of someone crying. Elena got up and opened her door to find Lucy standing in the hallway in her nightgown, tears streaming down her face. Lucy, what's wrong? The wind is so loud and I keep thinking about when Mama was sick and the doctor couldn't come because of a storm like this. Lucy sobbed. What if something happens to Papa? What if the house breaks? What if we're all alone? Elena's heart ached for the little girl. She knelt down and pulled Lucy into her arms. Oh, sweetheart. Your Papa is fine. He's sleeping in his room just down the hall. And this house is very strong. Your Papa built it to keep his family safe. But what if... Hey, what's going on out here? Thomas appeared in his doorway, his hair mussed from sleep. When he saw Lucy crying, his expression immediately filled with concern. Lucy is scared about the storm, Elena explained. Thomas sat down on the floor beside them, still in his nightshirt and looking more approachable than Elena had ever seen him. Come here, little one. Lucy threw herself into her father's arms, and Elena could see that this wasn't the first time the child had been frightened by memories of her mother's illness. I know this storm is scary, Thomas said gently, stroking Lucy's hair. But remember what Mama always said about storms? Lucy sniffled. That they're just the sky being dramatic and they always pass? That's right. And do you know what else? What? Storms can't hurt the love between people, Even when Mama got sick and had to go to heaven, the love between us stayed strong. And now Elena is here, and that love is growing bigger to include her too. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes at Thomas's words. She hadn't expected to be included so naturally in this intimate moment between father and daughter. Lucy looked between her father and Elena. Does that mean Elena loves us too? Elena's breath caught in her throat. She looked into Lucy's trusting eyes and realized that somewhere over the past few weeks, she truly had come to love this child who had welcomed her with such cautious hope. Yes, Elena said softly. I do love you, Lucy. Both of you. Thomas met Elena's eyes over Lucy's head, and something passed between them that felt deeper than gratitude or friendship. Can I sleep with you tonight, Papa? Lucy asked. Like when I was little? Of course. Elena, would you like to join us? We could all stay in the sitting room by the fire. It would be warmer and we could keep each other company. Elena hesitated. The invitation felt significant, like crossing an invisible line they had all been careful to respect. Please, Elena, Lucy said. I'll feel safer if we're all together. So Elena found herself curled up on the sofa in the sitting room, wrapped in one of Rebecca's quilts, while Thomas and Lucy shared the larger couch nearby. The fire crackled peacefully and the storm outside seemed less threatening when they were all together. Elena, Thomas said quietly, after Lucy had fallen back to sleep. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. What was your life like before you came here? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I can tell there are things you haven't talked about. Elena was quiet for a long moment, listening to Lucy's peaceful breathing and the wind outside. Something about the intimacy of the moment, the firelight, the storm, the sense of being cut off from the outside world, made her feel safe enough to share the truth. My stepfather was not a kind man, she began slowly. After my mother died, he drank too much and gambled away everything we had. He wanted to marry me off to a man who was known for hurting his wives. Thomas's jaw tightened in the firelight. That's why you left. Yes, I was terrified of becoming trapped in a marriage with someone who would hurt me. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like the only chance I had to escape. I'm sorry, Thomas said simply. I'm sorry you had to go through that, and I'm sorry you had to be so brave just to survive. Elena wiped away a tear she hadn't realized was falling. I was so scared when I got here that you might turn out to be the same kind of man. I kept waiting for you to show your true nature. And what do you think now? Elena looked at Thomas across the firelit room. This man who had protected her from Jake, who comforted his daughter with such gentleness, who was asking permission to know her better rather than demanding answers. I think, Elena said carefully, that you are exactly what you appear to be. A good man who keeps his promises. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Elena, I need you to know something. When I first wrote that advertisement, I was thinking about practical things. Someone to help with Lucy in the house. Someone to share the work of running the ranch. But these past few weeks, Arnie trailed off, seeming to struggle with his words. What is it? Elena prompted gently. I've started to care about you as a person, not just as someone to fill a role. I hope that doesn't frighten you. Elena's heart began to beat faster. It doesn't frighten me. I've started to care about you too, both of you. They looked at each other across the firelit room, and Elena felt something shift between them. The careful politeness was dissolving, replaced by something warmer and more genuine. I don't want to rush anything, Thomas said. We have all the time in the world to figure out what this could become. Spring came early to Montana that year, and with it came changes that Elena could never have imagined when she first stepped off the train in Billings. The snow melted in rushing streams down the mountainsides, the grass turned green almost overnight, and wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant colors. Elena had been at the Mitchell Ranch for 6 months now, and the careful arrangement between her and Thomas had grown into something neither of them had expected. She no longer slept in the guest room, not because Thomas had demanded it, but because she had grown tired of pretending that her heart didn't skip when he smiled at her, or that she didn't look forward to their evening conversations on the porch. The transformation had been gradual. After the blizzard in November, they had all grown more comfortable with each other. Elena began to feel like a true member of the family, rather than a guest who was overstaying her welcome. Lucy started calling her Aunt Elena, a title that made Elena's heart swell with happiness every time she heard it. But it was Thomas who surprised Elena the most. The reserved, polite man who had met her at the train station had revealed himself to be thoughtful, funny, and incredibly kind. He asked for her opinions about ranch business, listened carefully to her ideas about improvements to the house, and never made her feel like her thoughts were less important because she was a woman. "Elena," Thomas said one morning in March as they watched Lucy chase butterflies in the meadow behind the house, "I need to ask you something important." Elena looked up from the letter she was writing to Sophia, who had indeed found happiness with her shopkeeper in California. "What is it?" Thomas seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. He kept running his hand through his hair and looking everywhere except at Elena's face. "The people in town have been asking questions," he began carefully, "about our arrangement, about whether we're actually married or just living together." Elena felt her cheeks grow warm. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing it would have to come eventually. In her letters to Sophia, Elena had been vague about the exact nature of her relationship with Thomas, partly because she wasn't entirely sure herself. "What have you been telling them?" Elena asked. "That it's none of their business," Thomas said with a slight smile. "But Mrs. Henderson at the general store is starting to make pointed comments about proper Christian households, and I'm worried it might affect Lucy. Children can be cruel when their parents have opinions about other families." Elena nodded, understanding the dilemma. In small communities like this one, reputation mattered. If people thought she and Thomas were living in sin, it would reflect badly on all of them, especially Lucy. "So what do you think we should do?" Elena asked, though she suspected she knew what Thomas was going to say. Thomas finally met her eyes. "I think we should get married. For real this time, not just as a business arrangement." Elena's heart began to race. "Thomas, I know this isn't the most romantic proposal," Thomas continued quickly. "But Elena, these past few months have been the happiest I've been since Rebecca died. Not because you've replaced her, no one could do that, but because you've brought something new and wonderful into our lives. You've brought hope." Elena set down her pen and really looked at Thomas. His face was earnest and open, and she could see that he meant every word. "I care about you," Thomas continued, "not just as someone who helps with the house and takes care of Lucy, but as a woman I've come to respect and love." The word hung in the air between them like a butterfly that had just landed, beautiful and delicate and real. "You love me?" Elena whispered. Thomas nodded. "I do. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you make Lucy laugh, the way you hum while you cook. I love the stories you tell about your mother, and the way you get excited about planting the vegetable garden. I love that you're brave enough to argue with me when you think I'm wrong about something." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Thomas, you don't have to answer right now," Thomas said quickly. "I know this is sudden, and I know you didn't come here expecting to fall in love. If you need time to think about it, I love you too," Elena interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Thomas blinked in surprise. "You do?" Elena laughed, wiping away the tears that were now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Yes, you foolish man. I've been trying not to love you for months, but it's impossible. You're too good, too kind, too—" She trailed off, not sure how to explain the 100 small ways Thomas had made her feel safe and valued and cherished. Thomas stood up from his chair and knelt beside Elena's. "Elena Kozlov, will you marry me? Not because you need a place to live or because I need help with the ranch, but because we love each other and want to build a life together." Elena looked into Thomas's eyes and saw her future reflected there. Spring mornings on the porch, summer afternoons watching Lucy play in the meadow, winter evenings by the fire sharing stories and dreams. She saw birthday celebrations and Christmas mornings, difficulties faced together and joys shared completely. "Yes," Elena said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Thomas's face broke into the widest smile Elena had ever seen. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing and dizzy. "Aunt Elena!" "Papa, what are you doing?" Lucy came running from the meadow, her dress stained with grass and her hair full of dandelion seeds. Thomas set Elena down but kept his arms around her waist. "Lucy, how would you feel about Elena becoming your new mama?" Lucy's eyes grew wide. "Really, for real this time?" Elena knelt down to Lucy's level. "Only if you want me to. I would never try to take your real mama's place in your heart." But if you'd like, I could be your second mama, someone who loves you just as much but in a different way. Lucy threw her arms around Elena's neck. I would like that very much. I love you, Elena. I love you too, sweetheart. They decided to have the wedding in June, when the wildflowers would be at their peak, and the weather would be perfect for a celebration. Elena wrote to Sophia with the news, and Sophia's response was filled with exclamation marks and demands for every detail. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy and happy. Elena worked with Mrs. Patterson, the local seamstress, to create a wedding dress from fabric that Thomas had ordered specially from Denver. It wasn't white. Elena felt that white was for young girls marrying for the first time, not for widows starting new chapters, but a soft blue that matched the Montana sky. Lucy insisted on having a role in the ceremony, so they decided she would carry a bouquet of wildflowers and stand with Elena and Thomas at the altar. The whole community would be invited, including some neighboring ranchers Elena had met but didn't know well. Are you nervous? Thomas asked one evening as they sat on the porch planning the details of their celebration. Elena considered the question. Not about marrying you, she said honestly, but about being the center of attention for so many people I don't really know. They're good people, Thomas assured her. A little nosy sometimes, but good-hearted. They're curious about you because you're new, but once they get to know you, they'll love you as much as Lucy and I do. Elena leaned against Thomas's shoulder, marveling at how natural it felt to be close to him. Thomas, can I tell you something? Anything. When I first came here, I was so scared that I would be trapped in another situation where I had no control over my own life. But what I've found instead is a partnership. You ask for my opinions, you listen when I disagree with you, you treat me like an equal. Thomas was quiet for a moment. That's how it should be between husband and wife. Rebecca and I were partners in everything. She had as much say in running this ranch as I did, maybe more. I wouldn't want anything less with you. Elena felt a warm glow of contentment. I'm so lucky that I found you. We're both lucky, Thomas corrected gently. Lucky that we were both brave enough to take a chance on something unknown. The night before the wedding, Elena couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window looking out at the moonlit landscape, thinking about how much her life had changed in less than a year. This time last year, she had been trapped in Victor's house, facing impossible choices and seeing no way out. Now she was about to marry a man she loved deeply, become a mother to a child who had stolen her heart, and start a new life in a place that had become home in ways she never expected. There was a soft knock on her door. Elena, are you awake? Come in, Lucy. Lucy padded into the room in her nightgown carrying her favorite doll. I can't sleep either. I'm too excited about tomorrow. Elena opened her arms and Lucy climbed into bed beside her. They snuggled together looking out at the star-filled sky. Elena, Lucy said sleepily, do you think my real mama would be happy about tomorrow? Elena thought carefully about her answer. I think your real mama loved your papa very much and she loved you most of all. I think she would be happy to know that you have more people to love you and take care of you. I think so too, Lucy said with satisfaction. I think she would like you. Elena smiled in the darkness. I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers across the ranch. Elena woke feeling peaceful and excited, ready to start this new chapter of her life with the man who had seen her heart and loved what he found there. 1 year after her wedding day, Elena stood in the same meadow where she had married Thomas, but this time she wasn't alone. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in the yellow blanket that Lucy had helped her knit during the long winter evenings. Baby Rebecca, named for Thomas's first wife with Lucy's enthusiastic approval, was only 3 weeks old, but she already had her father's steady gaze and what Elena swore was her grandmother's stubborn chin. She's perfect, Thomas said softly, looking down at his newest daughter with wonder in his eyes. Just perfect. Elena smiled, feeling tired but completely content. The birth had been difficult. Dr. Morrison had been worried for a while about both mother and baby, but Elena had been determined to bring this child safely into the world. Now, holding little Rebecca in the place where she had promised to love Thomas for the rest of her life, Elena felt like her happiness was complete. Lucy, come meet your sister properly, Elena called to the 9-year-old who was picking wildflowers nearby. Lucy ran over, her arms full of prairie roses and black-eyed Susans. She had been fascinated by the baby from the moment Elena brought her home. constantly asking to help with feeding and diaper changes. "Can she see the flowers, Mama Elena?" Lucy asked, using the name that had evolved naturally over the past year. Elena's heart still skipped a little every time Lucy called her Mama. It had started happening gradually after the wedding, as Lucy grew more comfortable with the idea of having two mothers, one in heaven and one right here on earth. "She can see shapes and colors," Elena explained, lowering the baby so Lucy could show her the bouquet. "See how she's looking at the bright yellow ones?" Lucy beamed with pride. She likes them. "I'm going to pick her flowers every day." Thomas chuckled and ruffled Lucy's hair. "You'll have to save some for the bees, sweetheart." As they walked back toward the house, Elena marveled at how much her world had expanded since that terrifying day, when she first saw Victor's red pen circling the mail-order bride advertisement. The scared young woman who had fled Ukraine with nothing but her mother's jewelry and a desperate hope seemed like a different person entirely. The ranch had prospered under their joint management. Elena's suggestions for improving efficiency had helped increase their cattle profits, and her vegetable garden now supplied not only their own table, but also brought in extra income from sales in town. Thomas had built a proper root cellar for storing her preserved foods, and Elena had convinced him to add a few dairy cows so they could make their own butter and cheese. More importantly, the three of them had become a real family. Lucy had blossomed under Elena's patient guidance, learning to read and write fluently, and developing a love for cooking that reminded Elena of her own childhood with her mother. Thomas had grown more relaxed and happy, laughing more often and worrying less about every little detail of ranch life, and Elena herself had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed. She could deliver a calf when the veterinarian couldn't make it through a storm, negotiate fair prices with cattle buyers, and manage the household budget with the same careful attention her mother had brought to her baking. But more than that, she had learned to trust her own judgment and speak up for what she believed was right. "Elena," Thomas said as they reached the porch, "I have something to show you." Elena settled into the rocking chair that Thomas had made for her during her pregnancy, carefully adjusting baby Rebecca in her arms. Thomas disappeared into the house and returned with a letter and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This came in yesterday's mail," Thomas said, handing her the letter. Elena recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Sophia, whose letters had been a constant source of joy over the past year. Elena had shared every detail of her new life, from her wedding day to Lucy's progress in school, to her pregnancy and Thomas's excitement about becoming a father again. "Dear Elena," the letter began, "I was so excited to receive news about little Rebecca's birth. Heinrich and I are thrilled for your growing family. I have wonderful news of my own. We're expecting our first child in the fall. Heinrich is over the moon, and I finally understand what you meant when you wrote about feeling like your heart might burst with happiness. But I'm also writing with sad news. I received a letter from my cousin back home. Your stepfather Victor died last month. Apparently, he drank himself to death after losing everything in a card game. I'm sorry if this news upsets you, but I thought you should know. There's something else, though. Before he died, Victor told people in the village that he was sorry for how he treated you. He said you were the smartest person in the family, and that he had been a fool to try to force you into marriage with Boris. Speaking of Boris, he died 2 years ago, when one of his horses kicked him. I know it's terrible to say, but everyone in the village said you were lucky to escape when you did. I hope this letter finds you well and happy with your beautiful family. Give my love to Thomas and Lucy and kiss little Rebecca for me. Your devoted friend, Sophia." Elena finished reading the letter with mixed emotions. She felt sad about Victor's death, despite everything he had put her through. But mostly, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the path that had led her away from that life and toward this one. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, noticing her tears. "Yes," Elena said, wiping her eyes. "Just thinking about how different things could have been." Thomas sat down on the porch steps beside her chair. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had stayed?" Elena looked down at baby Rebecca, then at Lucy, who was arranging her flowers in a glass jar, then at Thomas, whose love had made all of this possible. "Sometimes," Elena admitted. "But not with regret. More with amazement that I was brave enough to choose something better." Thomas handed her the wrapped package. "This is from the whole community. Mrs. Henderson organized it. Elena opened the package to find a beautiful baby quilt made from fabric squares contributed by all the women in town. Each square was different. Some were pieces of their own children's outgrown clothes. Others were cut from their best dresses or kitchen curtains. But together, they formed a pattern of interlocking circles that seemed to represent the way their community had embraced Elena and made her part of their extended family. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered, running her fingers over the careful stitches. "There's a note," Lucy said, pointing to a small envelope tucked into the folds of the quilt. Elena opened it to find a message written in Mrs. Henderson's careful script. "For little Rebecca Mitchell, welcomed with love into our community. May she always know that she belongs here, just as her mother has found her true home among us." Elena felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. When she had first arrived in Billings, she had been so focused on escaping her past that she hadn't dared to dream about building a future. But these people had not only accepted her, they had embraced her, supported her, and made her feel like she had always belonged here. "Elena," Thomas said quietly, "there's something I want to say to you." Elena looked up at her husband, noting the serious expression on his face. "When I first placed that advertisement in the newspaper, I thought I was looking for someone to fill a role. Wife, mother, housekeeper. I thought I understood what I needed." Thomas paused, looking out at the landscape that stretched endlessly toward the mountains. "But what I found instead was a partner in the truest sense of the word. Someone who made me a better man, who brought joy back into Lucy's life, who turned this house back into a home. You didn't just fill Rebecca's place, you created your own place, and it's exactly where you were always meant to be." Elena felt her heart swell with emotion. "Thomas, I know I don't say it enough," Thomas continued, "but I want you to know that you are the love of my life, not because you were convenient or because you were available, but because you are you, the brave, kind, strong, funny, and more beautiful every day I know you." Elena shifted baby Rebecca to one arm so she could reach out and take Thomas's hand. "Do you know what I love most about you?" Thomas shook his head. "I love that you saw who I really was even when I was too scared to show you. You looked past the frightened girl who stepped off that train and saw the woman I could become. You made me believe I was worth loving." Lucy, who had been listening to this conversation with the serious attention that children give to important adult discussions, suddenly spoke up. "Are you going to kiss now? Because that's what people do in books when they say things like that." Thomas and Elena looked at each other and burst out laughing. Thomas stood up and leaned down to kiss Elena gently, while Lucy giggled and baby Rebecca slept peacefully in her mother's arms. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Elena rocked her baby and watched her husband and stepdaughter play catch in the yard. The evening air was warm and sweet with the scent of blooming wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully as they grazed in the meadow. Elena thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment, the fear and desperation that had driven her from Ukraine, the loneliness and uncertainty of the voyage across the ocean, the careful steps toward trust and love that had led to her wedding day, and now this perfect evening with her complete family around her,